Lloyd is a young boy whose entire village was destroyed as collateral damage in the fight against the Demon Lord. You can tell by the look on his eyes that he has clearly seen some crazy trauma-inducing stuff, and when Merlin finds him standing there, she feels guilty because it was her carelessness that led to this destruction. To atone for her mistake, she decides to take Lloyd in and give him a new home with her. And while he's living with her, she also decides to train him in the ways of magic. The first spell she tries teaching Lloyd is the Flame spell, and her teaching method basically involves showing Lloyd the spell for approximately 3 seconds, and then telling him you won't get dinner today if he can't replicate the spell on his own. Against all odds, by evening time, Lloyd finally manages to create a small flame in his hand, but when he shows it to Merlin, instead of being supportive, she calls his fire pumy and singes his eyebrows with a wall of flame for not doing it well enough. But she does let him have dinner since he learned the spell. The next day, Merlin switches training subjects and tells Lloyd he will be learning water magic today. She gives him a small demonstration and swipes her foot across the ground, creating a small spout of water. She then asks Lloyd to do the same, but after trying it, all he is able to do is make the ground a little wet, and he seems pretty proud of himself, but Merlin isn't impressed. So she pours a ton of water on Lloyd to show him what real water magic looks like. As time goes on, Lloyd's training continues with him doing his best to learn spells and Merlin punishing him for not doing it well enough. But as it turns out, her training methods are actually really effective because by winter time, Lloyd's skill with magic has improved so much that he can now create a snow sculpture of Merlin with a wave of a finger. It was a thoughtful gesture and Merlin does appreciate it, but she doesn't want to break character. So she takes control of the snow sculpture and grabs Lloyd with it while making it 30 feet tall to show him what real snow manipulation looks like. The snow then crumbles and Lloyd falls to the ground, but the two of them have a good understanding of each other by this point, so as soon as he digs himself out of the snow, he tells Merlin he will work harder on his magic and she smiles in acknowledgement. More time goes by, and one morning, Merlin is laying on her couch with a massive hangover because she drank too much last night. Lloyd goes to check on her and asks if she's alright, but Merlin tells him she feels absolutely terrible. Lloyd wants to help, so he puts his hand on her forehead and activates his white magic to help her recover from her hangover, and after a few seconds, Merlin suddenly feels a lot better. She sits upright and hugs Lloyd while thanking him for healing her. But now that she's back on her feet, she says it's time for them to get back to his magic training. So she drags Lloyd outside again. Things go on like this for years, but one day Merlin receives a book in the mail that has her very concerned. Just then, Lloyd knocks on her door to tell her that dinner is ready, so she tells him she's coming and starts putting the book away. However, as she is doing so, she accidentally drops the book in front of Lloyd, so he bends down to pick it up, and as soon as his hands touch the book, all sorts of information floods his mind in an instant. Lloyd passes out from the sudden data dump, and when Merlin realizes what happened, she's astonished because Lloyd has the qualities of the Chosen One. She takes Lloyd to bed for now, but if he really is the Chosen One, then she can't let him make the same mistakes she did. She kisses his forehead and there's a faint glow left behind as she places a spell on him because she can't let Lloyd become overconfident in his power like she was. The next day, Lloyd's training continues, and this time Merlin takes him out into the forest so he can practice his white magic. Lloyd uses it on a single fruit to make it grow ripe and juicy, and Merlin praises him for doing a good job, but she also wants to show him that he still has a long way to go, so she puts her hand on the tree and uses white magic to make the entire thing grow lush and green. Later that night, Merlin is helping Lloyd study and explains to him that there are some orcs who can use rare magic to control monsters. While reading, Lloyd notices something called ancient magic, but as soon as he mentions it, Merlin's mood shifts and she tells him he doesn't need to learn ancient magic. Some of Merlin's other lessons include learning how to summon your magic staff as quickly as possible, but since Lloyd didn't do it fast enough, she knocks him over with her own staff. She then tells Lloyd that he must never neglect his training, no matter how powerful he may become, and Lloyd promises to always remain diligent. The next lesson involves learning about magic stones, so Merlin explains that they are a crystallized form of magic, and its power can turn surrounding objects into magic stones as well. A few years go by, and one day during one of Merlin's lessons, she takes Lloyd out into the middle of nowhere, gives him a knife, and tells him he has to survive in this forest and make it home on his own. She then skedaddles before Lloyd can make any objections, so he really is stuck out here now. And as soon as Merlin is gone, a white wolf walks into view and immediately attacks Lloyd. Lloyd runs for his life and ends up crawling up a tree to hide from the wolf. He doesn't think magic from a white mage like him would be enough to defeat a monster like that, so his only option is to run home while avoiding any and all monster encounters. But with that said, when he uses magic to scan the area so he can figure out which direction to go, he discovers that he's really far from home right now. He has no choice but to start slowly making his way through the forest, and when night falls, he spends his time studying his spells to make as many improvements as possible. Several days go by like this, and at one point, Lloyd accidentally steps on a twig that alerts a giant spider to his presence. Lloyd starts panicking and immediately runs in the opposite direction, while using a haste spell to boost his speed enough to outrun the spider. Eventually, he manages to make it home in one piece, but he collapses from exhaustion right outside the door, and when Merlin sees him, she is really proud of him for making it back on his own. A few more years go by, and one day, while Lloyd is busy cleaning, he notices a book on Merlin's desk about a town. So he asks her if he can borrow the book out of curiosity, and she tells him he can have it. By this point, Lloyd has pretty much completed his training, so he doesn't have to deal with Merlin's constant lessons anymore, but now, every other day, she drags him off to help her develop new magic because Lloyd's talent for spell development is great, and he's glad she's treating him as an equal now. But he hasn't gotten any sleep in the past week because Merlin keeps making him stay up all night for the sake of magic research. He's starting to get sick of all the constant pressure, and he is still really curious about what town life is like, so he eventually makes a drastic decision. The next morning, Merlin heads up to Lloyd's room to ask for his help on some more magic research. But to her surprise, he is nowhere to be found, and judging by the book on his desk, she has a good idea of where he went. Meanwhile, Lloyd has just arrived in the town, and as he is walking through the streets, he is amazed by how busy everyone is. Since this is the first time he has ever been in a town, once he buys a piece of bread, he runs out of money entirely, so he realizes he needs to find a job soon. And as luck would have it, an adventurer recruitment poster blows straight into his face, so Lloyd decides to sign up for the position. All the while, a mysterious man has been following Lloyd, and he seems rather intrigued by Lloyd's choice. After Lloyd signs up to join the adventurer's party, he heads to the top of a castle with his new party to fight a giant cyclops. The leader of the party, Alan, asks the healer, Sheena, to heal him. But right when Sheena is about to do so, Lloyd casts his refined stat buff magic, so everyone feels better than ever. However, none of them realize that Lloyd was the one behind it since he didn't say anything. After the buff, the archer shoots the Cyclops' eye, and the knight blocks one of its punches, and she is honestly shocked by how easy it was. However, Alan doesn't question his sudden boost in strength at all and proceeds to one-shot the Cyclops, while completely convinced that he did it on his own. But the knight seems to have noticed that Lloyd had something to do with their sudden increase in power. Anyway, now that the Cyclops has been taken care of, the party rides back into town, and Alan is being hailed as a hero because the Cyclops is apparently so hard to beat that no one else in town was able to do it. As expected, the reward for defeating the Cyclops was huge, but Alan only gives Lloyd 5 coins and says the low pay is because he's only a new D-rank adventurer. Lloyd accepts the money and doesn't complain, but when Alan suggests a toast to the party's victory, Lloyd excuses himself because he doesn't want to be involved. The party's mage gets offended that Lloyd doesn't want to drink with them, but Alan tells her it's fine since they can always hire another white mage, and it's not like he contributed much to the party's performance anyway. Meanwhile, back at Merlin's house, the man who was watching Lloyd earlier shows up, and Merlin asks him if he has any updates on Lloyd. Will tells her that Lloyd arrived in the town and has just joined the hero party, and Merlin is relieved to hear that Lloyd is safe. She figured it was about time for him to venture out on his own and experience the world, and as long as he doesn't become arrogant like she did when she was younger, she thinks he will be okay. Will asks her if she still has regrets about what happened that day, and Merlin's lips curl in self-hatred as she remembers her mistake. Back then, the Demon Lord was willing to self-destruct to seize the magic book, something that Merlin failed to anticipate. As a result, an entire village was nuked, killing everyone nearby in an instant, including Merlin. Fortunately, her party member, Sybil, was able to use powerful ancient magic to revive everyone who died to the Demon Lord's explosion, but it cost him his life, and Merlin has been blaming herself for it ever since. Back to Lloyd's adventures, he is still part of the hero party. Every time Alan or the others are struggling in combat, he always casts buffs on them to make their battles easier. Thanks to him, they have a near-perfect victory record, and everyone is always performing at top capacity, but none of them realize how much Lloyd is carrying the team. Later that night, Rena is reading up on defense when Alan stumbles into her room to see what she's up to. She tells him she's just curious about something, since the impact of monsters' attacks on her shield hasn't been as hard lately, and she doesn't understand why. Alan admits that he has been feeling it a lot stronger lately too, but he assumes it's just his natural talent at work. However, Rena reminds him that he hasn't been training much recently, so there's no reason for him to have suddenly gotten stronger. Meanwhile, out in the forest that night, a group of guards are finishing their nightly patrols when all of a sudden, one of them screams out in pain. The other looks up and sees this giant golem standing over him. and in that moment, he realizes that he's really going to die because of a minimum wage job. The next morning, the guard captain meets with Alan to ask for his help. He explains that the guards that were on night patrol yesterday were killed in brutal fashion. Alan immediately accepts the request since he thinks it should be easy enough to defeat a golem. Later that day, they head to the site of the attack, and thanks to Lloyd's tracking magic, they are able to locate the golem in a cave behind the waterfall. Since Lloyd is still supporting everyone, they are able to easily defeat the golem, but there's a demon nearby who creates another one from the rocks on the ceiling. Lloyd takes a closer look at the demon and realizes it is using a staff with a magic stone to control the golem, and magic stones are very dangerous, so he needs to take charge and act quickly before anything goes wrong. He casts an accuracy buff spell and orders Lulu to fire an arrow at the demon. Lulu is a bit surprised by Lloyd's sudden order, especially since the demon is hiding behind a wall, but she does it anyway and her arrow somehow manages to connect. Lloyd then orders Mia to teleport the staff over to him, and as soon as she does so, Lloyd casts a spell to seal its power. Alan is getting pissed by the fact that Lloyd is ordering the others around when he's supposed to be the leader, so he tries to assert his dominance by charging in to deliver the final blow on the golem. Lloyd doesn't want to let him die, so he casts a speed boost spell on himself and runs forward to push Alan out of the way before the golem could squish his head. However, Alan doesn't even acknowledge the fact that Lloyd just saved his life and yells at him for getting in his way. Alan then proceeds to finish the golem off, and when everyone gets back to town, he fires Lloyd for getting on his nerves. He also accuses him of slacking off and never doing anything to help the team, and because of all the years of Merlin telling him his skills weren't good enough, Lloyd naturally believes he must be the problem here. He agrees to leave the party without much of a fuss, and over the next few days, he tries to find a new party to join, but it's really difficult since most parties are already full and white mages aren't in high demand. However, as luck would have it, a girl named Yui happens to really need a white mage, so as soon as she finds Lloyd, she grabs his hand and begs him to join her party. Yui drags Lloyd off to meet her party members, and they are surprised that she's back so soon. They assume she wasn't able to find a new white mage for their party since it'd be practically impossible to find one on such short notice. But to their surprise, Yui points to Lloyd and says he will be joining their party. There's just one problem with that though. Yui dragged Lloyd here without explaining anything to him, so he never agreed to join their party in the first place. The others had a feeling it was too good to be true, so they tell Yui they should just give up on the quest they were supposed to take on since they can't handle it without a white mage, and there's no guarantee that Lloyd would be strong enough to replace Clum in the first place. Everyone seems to agree that taking the quests as they are now is too risky, but Yui doesn't want to let their client down because she really needs help. Lloyd doesn't know all the details here, but he can tell that the quest is important, so he asks if they can just let some other party handle it instead. However, they tell him that there's no one else available to do it. The quest is A-rank difficulty, so only parties that are A-rank and above are allowed to accept the quest, but all the A-rank parties in the capital are already out on other missions, so no one's available. Yui's party is S-rank, so they meet the requirements for the mission, but since their usual white mage is gone, they would need to find a replacement. Unfortunately, according to the guild's rules, parties are only allowed to work with people who are registered as official members, so they can't just borrow a white mage from another party, and finding one who is unaffiliated on such short notice is pretty much impossible. Lloyd would love to help them, but he genuinely thinks he isn't strong enough to be of any help to an S-rank party. However, before he can say anything, Yui asserts that everything will be fine as long as they have Lloyd on their team. They end up taking Lloyd out into a field because they need to assess his abilities before he can join their party, but again, Lloyd never actually agreed to any of this. They end up taking him out into a field and Yui asks Lloyd to give them a demonstration of his power, but he is worried that his abilities will probably be disappointing to them since they are S-rank just like his master. Daggis tells Yui that it's not fair to put Lloyd on the spot like that and ask him to display his power, but if she's going to hold a test, she should at least specify what spell she wants him to use. Daggis has a point, so Yui tells Lloyd that he needs to cast enchantment magic on all of them, but Lloyd is shocked because that sounds way too easy to be an S-rank party test. Just to confirm, he asks her if she really just wants him to cast enhancement magic on everyone here, and Yui tells him he's right, but she wants him to cast it on all of them at once. This confuses Lloyd even more because he has cast enhancement magic on multiple targets several times, and it's barely even an inconvenience for him. So how could something like this be a test? At first he thinks there must be some hidden requirement they aren't telling him about, but nope. All they want is for Lloyd to cast enhancement magic on them, and to be honest, they think something like this might be too difficult for him. They ask Lloyd if he can do it, and Lloyd says he can, but he still doesn't really understand why the test is so easy. He summons his staff and proceeds to cast the enhancement magic, But Yui is more focused on the fact that he just summoned his staff out of nowhere. She asks Lloyd where he got that, so he explains that it was just some basic storage magic, so it's not a big deal. More importantly, he wants to know what Yui thinks of the enhancement magic he cast on her. Yui hadn't even realized that Lloyd had cast any magic, but now that she thinks about it, she does feel a bit stronger than normal. The others can feel the effects as well, but it seems different from normal enhancement magic for some reason, so Yui takes out her sword to do a little test. She takes a practice swing at a tree, and even though she didn't intend to, she effortlessly slices through the tree in one swing. She could hardly believe what she just did, but Lloyd thinks it's normal for the enhancements he cast. Yui and the others were only expecting him to cast strength enhancements, but he thought that was too easy, so they also cast defense, speed, mana, and vitality buffs on them as well. The others are in utter disbelief after seeing what Lloyd is capable of, so they just stand there for a second and stare at him. Lloyd misinterprets their silence for disappointment, so he assumes he must have messed up somehow. He apologizes for wasting their time since they obviously don't want a white mage like him in their party, but before he could leave, Yui calls him back because she can't let someone as talented as him go. She also wants to learn more about Lloyd, so she asks him some questions, and she eventually finds out that Lloyd was previously part of the hero party. Yui thinks it's a really big deal since the hero party is well known throughout the kingdom, but Lloyd says he was fired for apparently lacking power, so he doesn't think he was very useful to them. Dagus and the others tell Lloyd that it makes no sense, since they've never seen someone cast so many types of enhancement magic at once before, but Lloyd is convinced that there are bound to be people in this world who are stronger than him. He tells Yui and the others that they'd be better off just getting their former white mage to come back, but that's not really an option for Yui's party because Clum, the party's white mage, has a little sister who's really sick. Up until recently, Clum has been taking care of her sister every day while also adventuring, but has been wearing her down a lot. So much so that she isn't able to focus on the battlefield, which is why she ended up quitting. They all know that Clum only quit because she didn't want to be a liability to them, and they don't want to see her go, but they have to respect her decision. That's why they've been looking for a replacement white mage to take over for her. Normally, they just do the quest without a white mage, but A-rank quests are particularly difficult to handle without a dedicated healer. Lloyd can tell that everyone cares about Clum a lot, and he'd like to help them out if he can, so he asks them what Clum's sister is sick with. Yui doesn't know much about it, but she does know that it's an illness that's turning Clum's sister's body into magistones. Lloyd remembers reading about magistones turning other things into magistones as well, and ever since then, he has been trying to figure out a way to reverse the process, so he thinks he can help. He asks Yui to lead him to Clum's house, and a little while later, they arrive at her house. Clum is surprised to see Yui and a stranger here, but she lets them in so they can chat. Lloyd apologizes ahead of time because what he's about to ask might be rude, but he wants to know every detail about how Clum's sister got sick. Clum doesn't mind filling him in on what happened, so she explains that she and her sister, Sylvie, used to adventure together all the time, but during one particular quest, Sylvie got injured, and she has been unconscious ever since. Yui asks if it was a monster that injured Sylvie, but honestly, Clum has no idea what actually happened because Sylvie had already collapsed by the time she was found. Lloyd asks what symptoms Sylvie is suffering from, but Clum thinks it would be much quicker to just show him what happened instead. She leads Yui and Lloyd to the door to Sylvie's bedroom, but she warns them to brace themselves because they may not be ready for what they are about to witness. As soon as Clum opens the door, Lloyd and Yui are hit with a wave of unpleasant mana, and it's all coming from Sylvie. Clum takes the covers off Sylvie's body and reveals that her arms and feet have already begun to transform. This is the first time Lloyd has actually seen the effect of magic stones on a person, and he is shocked by how bad it actually is. Sylvie's mana has gone out of control for some reason, and it's causing her body to transform bit by bit, so it's only a matter of time before she is entirely consumed by the magistones. Lloyd asks Clum to let him take a look at Sylvie, since he has something he wants to try, and if his hypothesis is correct, then he might be able to cure Sylvie. Clum finds it hard to believe that Lloyd would be able to cure Clum when all the best healers in the country could do nothing for her. Lloyd tells her that Sylvie's sickness is likely the result of her being pierced by high-purity magistones. He asks Clum if the cave Sylvie got hurt and had a high mana density, and Clum confirms that he's right. In fact, the quest they were on that day was to gather magistones from the cave, so that might have something to do with it. Lloyd asks her to show him where Sylvie's wound is, so Clum points at it, and just as Lloyd had expected, a magistone must have entered Sylvie's body through her wound, and the magistone's mana is what's transforming her. So far, all of Lloyd's deductions have been correct, so Yui asks Clum to put her faith in him so he can perform the operation to save Sylvie's life. Once everything is ready, Lloyd casts a spell and begins draining mana straight out of Sylvie's body, but absorbing all that dark energy is really taking a toll on him. Sylvie's illness was caused by her mana going berserk after being afflicted by a Magistone, so if Lloyd wants to turn her back to normal, then he needs to remove as much mana as possible from Sylvie's body. But he also needs to make sure he doesn't accidentally kill her from mana depletion, so he plans to heal her while simultaneously draining her mana. He begins casting the spells, but Clum doesn't recognize the heal spell that Lloyd just used, so she asks him if there's anything different about it. Lloyd explains that he needs to do something with all the extra energy he's getting from Sylvie's body, so he's going to use an inferior heal spell to burn it since the version of the heal spell consumes a lot of mana. Yui doesn't know much about white mage lingo, so she asks Clum if what Lloyd is doing is impressive. However, impressive doesn't even begin to describe what Lloyd is doing. He's using a spell that he designed on his own, and he's casting 2 types of magic alone, which is already impressive, but he also has more willpower than any normal person. As Lloyd continues healing, the Magistone transformation on Sylvie's body begins to regress, and by the time Lloyd is done, she has finally returned to normal. That took a lot of effort to pull off, so Lloyd is winded now that he has completed it. Before long, Sylvie finally wakes up, and Clum is brought to tears at the sight of her little sister awake and alert again. Clum thanks Lloyd and Yui for everything they have done for her. But once Sylvie is back to full health, she plans to go adventuring with her again. Yui is disappointed that Clum won't be rejoining her party, but she understands that Clum needs to stick by her sister's side, so she heads down the hall and says goodbye. Lloyd is about to leave as well, but before he goes, Clum calls him back and asks him to take good care of the party for her. Lloyd tells her he isn't even an official party member yet, and he thinks he's still too weak to be useful. Clum has no idea what Lloyd means when he calls himself weak, but she tells him to let his heart make the decision for him. Later that evening, Yui and Lloyd tell all the others about Sylvie being cured, and they all praise Lloyd for his hard work. However, since Clum said she wouldn't be returning, they are going to have to reevaluate their future as a party. Lloyd has come to like everyone here in a short amount of time he has known them, and he can tell that they all genuinely care for their teammates, unlike the hero party. He nervously asks them if they'd still want to accept him as their healer, and everyone was kind of hoping he would eventually agree to join them. So this is really good news for their party. To celebrate Lloyd officially joining their party, Yui tells him he can eat as much as he wants tonight because they'll cover the bill, and that's the nicest thing anyone has done for Lloyd since he came to this city. He digs in and starts devouring plate after plate of food because it tastes incredible to him. But the others don't understand why he's praising the food so much because this is pretty average for the city. Lloyd can't believe such complex flavors are considered average here, and it makes him start to question the food he ate as a child. The others ask what kind of food Lloyd used to eat, so he explains that he just ate whatever mushrooms or herbs his master grew in the garden with some meat hunted from the forest. But his master had the cooking skills of someone who considers salt spicy, so the food she made was always bland. Yui asks Lloyd to tell them what kind of person his master is because cooking skills aside, if she was able to teach Lloyd such impressive magic, then she must be amazing. Silica asks if Lloyd's master is a white mage like him, but Lloyd never really thought to ask before he left home, so he isn't sure. But if he had a guess, then he'd say she's a combat-oriented mage with how often she caused explosions. Silica is surprised that Lloyd's master was able to teach him white magic even though she isn't a white mage, and if possible, Silica says she would like to train under Lloyd's master as well. But Lloyd immediately shuts her down and says she's much better off not meeting his master. After all the pain he had to suffer during Merlin's training, he wouldn't wish such torment on even his worst enemy. But that's not to say that he doesn't like his master. She was strict with her lessons, but she was also very kind at times, so he knows she cares about him. After their celebratory meal, Yui reminds everyone that they still need to come up with a strategy for their mission, but before that, they should probably explain the details of the quest to Lloyd. Yui pulls out the quest notice, and Dagus explains that their mission is to take care of a pack of monsters that have been tearing up farms in the area recently. The locals aren't able to drive the monsters away on their own, and apparently there are multiple different species of monsters traveling together, which is pretty much unheard of. With how strange the case is, there's no telling what might happen. But as adventurers, Yui believes it is their job to help the people who are in danger, and Lloyd agrees with her. As for their plan of attack, Yui and Dagus won't be very useful in a fight against a large mob of monsters, so they are going to have to rely on Silica's AoE magic to defeat the beasts. However, casting magic over a large area consumes a lot of mana, so Silica is worried that she won't be able to finish them all off depending on the size of the horde. Yui asks Lloyd if he can use any offensive spells, and Lloyd tells her he knows a few, but he doesn't think the spells of a white mage like him would be as good as those of a combat mage like Silica. Either way, they still need to come up with a battle plan, so Dagus suggests that he and Yui go out in front to draw the monster's attention, and once the monsters start chasing them, he'll lead them all into one spot so Silica can deal a final blow. As for Cross, his job will be to protect Silica while she casts her spell, and Lloyd will be on healing and support magic duty. Silica is a bit excited to receive support from Lloyd since she knows his buffs are incredibly strong, but Lloyd still doesn't understand why everyone thinks so highly of him. At first, Yui thought Lloyd was just being modest, but now she realizes that he genuinely doesn't understand how strong he is, so she tells him he should be a little more confident in his skills. Lloyd reminds her that he was kicked out of the hero party for lacking power, so he can't be that great, and the group still doesn't understand what kind of idiots would call Lloyd weak, but they fully trust in his abilities, and Lloyd is happy to hear that. Once they are done with the strategy meeting, they all head outside and agree to meet up tomorrow morning so they can begin their mission. They all start walking over to the inn together, but Dagus notices that Lloyd is walking in the opposite direction, so he goes over to ask him where he's going. It's a bit embarrassing, but Lloyd admits that he doesn't have enough money to afford an inn, so he has been sleeping under the bridge since he came to the city. Dagus refuses to let his new friend sleep under a bridge, so he hands Lloyd a bag of coins and tells him to take it. Lloyd tries to turn down the offer since he doesn't want to accept free money, but Dagus tells him he should just think of this as a short-term loan, and can just pay it back once he gets his share of the reward money for the mission. Lloyd is extremely thankful, so he promises to work hard to pay off the loan, and Dagus tells him to hurry up and come to the inn already. That night, Lloyd sleeps in a bed for the first time in a while, and he is unbelievably grateful that his teammates are such nice people. The next morning, Lloyd and the others gather outside Yui's house in preparation for the mission, and once Yui is ready, she comes out to join them. However, when she sees everyone standing there with no bags, she is confused since missions like these require a lot of luggage. The others explain that Lloyd actually helped them out and used his storage magic to hold all their bags, and they wouldn't have to carry them. Lloyd offers to do the same for Yui, and once her bag has been stored, she thanks him for the help because carrying those bags always makes traveling so difficult. Lloyd says he can teach them how to use storage magic if they want since it's not that complex, but the others had no idea it was even possible for normal people like them to do. Lloyd explains that everyone is born with at least a little bit of mana, so it should be possible to learn storage magic, although it takes a lot of practice to increase the storage capacity of your spell. But even if their storage space won't be as large as Lloyd, it'd still be useful to learn, so they ask Lloyd to teach them, and he says he'd be happy to. A little while later, they begin their journey, and while traveling through the plains, they eventually come across the border to the nation of demons. The demons have been laying low for now, so things are fairly peaceful, but who knows when they might try to conquer this continent again. Meanwhile, out in the forest, there's a cloaked man performing some clearly evil voodoo, and it's definitely going to cause some problems later on. Lloyd and the others eventually make it to their first checkpoint for the trip, and they got here a lot earlier than they expected, so they plan to set up camp near the water. Lloyd pulls all the camp gear out of his storage, and everyone begins working together to set up the tents and prepare a fireplace for nighttime. It takes a while, and by the time they are done, Yui is all sweaty from the hard work. She asks Dagus if she can go take a bath in the river now, but Dagus says there's still a lot of work to be done because Yui needs to gather the firewood for tonight's dinner. However, Lloyd says he's willing to gather the firewood for Yui, so she thanks him and grabs Silica and drags her off so they can take a bath together. A little while later, Lloyd is out in the forest collecting dry wood, and once he's got enough, he prepares to head back to camp, but just then, he hears a scream coming from the water nearby. Yui and Silica were taking a bath just like they said they would, but they weren't expecting to run into a basilisk in the water here. To make matters worse, they are both currently unarmed, so if Lloyd doesn't do something soon, then they are going to be eaten. He slides down the cliffside and launches a small fireball to get the monster's attention, and while it is distracted, he tells Yui and Silica to swim over to the shore. He then pulls their weapons out of storage and throws it to them, while simultaneously casting strengthening magic on them, and now that they are ready to fight, Yui jumps up and slices one of the basilisk's heads off in one swing. Silica then yells for Lloyd and Yui to take cover, because she's about to cast a fireball, so they both jump out of the way, and Silica launches a blast that incinerates the rest of the basilisk in one hit. Silica is shocked by how much firepower she just produced since she has never been able to do that before, and Lloyd failed to mention that he cast a buff spell on her earlier, so Silica has no idea what happened. Also, at one point, Yui's towel falls off her body right in front of Lloyd, but she'd rather not talk about it. Back at camp to take her mind off it, Lloyd decides to start teaching everyone how to use storage magic, and he basically tells them they need to use their hands to open a hole in space so they can store their stuff. It's nowhere near as easy as Lloyd made it sound, but they decide to give it a try anyway. Unsurprisingly, none of them are able to make it work, and Lloyd thinks it's because he's a bad teacher, but Dagas assures him that his explanations were perfect. It's just going to take a while for them to figure it out since they are beginners. Just then, Silica comes up with a bright idea of chanting storage, and when she does, her storage space actually opens up, so the others realize the mistake they made. They had been trying to cast the spell silently, since that's what Lloyd always does, but they aren't Lloyd. They all try doing it with incantations this time, and eventually, they are all able to get their storage spaces to work, although they still need a bit of practice. Later that night, after everyone has had dinner, Lloyd is sitting by the fire when Yui comes over to talk to him. She tells Lloyd she wants to thank him for joining the party, but Lloyd says there's no need since he was looking for a party to join anyway. Yui still feels a bit guilty because she did kind of pressure him into it, but Lloyd knows she was only being pushy because she was eager to get this quest done. Speaking of which, Lloyd asks her why she is so personally invested in this quest, because he thinks it's strange when she has no connection to the area that's under attack. Yui explains that it reminds her of her hometown because when she was a child, her village was attacked by monsters. She was the sole survivor of the incident, and it left her with lifelong trauma, so she can't just stand by while the same thing happens to another village. Just then, Lloyd hears a strange sound nearby, so he tells Yui to go wake the others up because they need to move. A few moments later, a large group of average-sized spiders come marching through the forest, and at first the group manages to stay hidden to avoid a confrontation. But then Yui accidentally steps on a twig, alerting all the spiders their presence. They all pull out their weapons and prepare for a fight, but almost immediately, one of the spiders manages to get a hold of Silica's wand and throws it up into a tree so she won't be able to cast any more attack spells. The situation is getting serious, so Lloyd takes charge and tells everyone he has a plan. First, he casts enhancement magic on everyone to make them stronger and sends Yui out to hold the spiders off, after which he asks Cross to go retrieve Silica's staff from the tree. Once the staff is back in Silica's hands, Lloyd instructs Silica and Cross to combine their attack to finish the spiders off. Lloyd's plan worked perfectly, and he is glad that everyone is safe, but he is worried he might have stepped out of line by yelling out orders like that. Lloyd apologizes for giving out orders when he's not the leader, but none of them care about that since Lloyd is knowledgeable, so his orders were actually really helpful. And to be honest, they'd appreciate it if he took over command next time they get themselves in a situation like that. The next morning, everyone packs up their camp gear, and after storing it all away, they get ready to continue their journey. However, Lloyd is lost in thought because he can't shake the feeling that their encounter with the spiders last night wasn't a coincidence. Over the next few days, Lloyd takes it upon himself to keep watch in case anything similar happens, but the others are starting to get worried since it's not healthy for him to keep staying up so late. They offer to go back to taking rotating shifts, but Lloyd tells them he's perfectly fine like this since he's used to staying up late. After all, with how mediocre his skills are, this is the only way he feels he can contribute to the team. That's absolutely not true and everyone knows it, but even after all the time they've already spent trying to convince Lloyd that his skills are extraordinary, he remains completely oblivious, so Silica tells her to just drop the subject for now so they can get some sleep. But before they go, she begs Lloyd not to push himself too hard. The next morning, the party continues their journey, and Yui is getting concerned about how low Lloyd's confidence is. So when she sees him silently casting a spell over there, she walks over to ask what he's doing. Lloyd explains that he's just casting a simple detection spell to see if there are any monsters nearby, but there's nothing simple about that. Detection magic is so rare that Yui has never actually met anyone that was capable of using it, but to Lloyd, it's something that's not even worth mentioning. He says his detection range isn't even that large, just a few kilometers, but he thinks it would be safer if he used the detection magic periodically for the rest of the trip to make sure the area is safe. Yui agrees that using detection magic would make their journey a lot safer, but she worries that making Lloyd use something as impressive as detection magic so frequently might be a little too much of a burden for him. She asks if there's anything she can help him with, but Lloyd tells her he can handle it on his own, so her help isn't needed. Later that night, Lloyd is staying up to keep watch again, and while they are in their tent, Yui and Silica start wondering if Lloyd might not trust them or something. She knows Lloyd is very capable, but so far he has refused to rely on any of his teammates even though they are meant to be companions. Silica doesn't think it's really something to be concerned about since it's natural for people to take a while to warm up to their teammates. In fact, when the team first got together, Yui and Silica barely ever spoke to each other, but over time their bond grew stronger and they became great friends. Lloyd's case is a little different since he seems to think he's weak for some reason, so he's desperately trying to prove himself even though he doesn't need to. There's probably a reason that he acts the way he does, and she's sure that Lloyd will eventually open up to them about it if they give him enough time. Meanwhile, outside, Lloyd is still busy with the night watch when Daggers comes up to him and says he has a favor to ask. He needs Lloyd to come help him with something, and Lloyd says he'd be happy to help, but he doesn't feel comfortable abandoning his night watch post. Cross then comes up and says he can handle the watch while Lloyd is gone, so Lloyd ends up agreeing to go with Dagus. They head a little deeper into the woods, and Dagus sets up a complex chime system along the trees. Lloyd asks what this is for, so Dagus explains that the chimes will alert them if any monsters approach, meaning Lloyd doesn't have to stay up all night keeping watch now. Lloyd begins to protest since he won't be able to use his detection magic while he's sleeping, so Dagus asks him if he really trusts him that little. Lloyd immediately denies it, but from the way he has been acting lately, it certainly looks like he doesn't trust the party. He always insists on scouting alone, and he refuses to let anyone else do the night watch or help him. Lloyd assures Dagus that he definitely trusts the party, but for years, Merlin has been telling him that he needs to learn to do everything independently, and the first party he joined after coming to the capital called him useless, so he thought he needed to push himself in order to be useful to them. Dagus doesn't feel like Lloyd is a burden at all, but even if he were holding the team back a little, he'd have no problem with that. The whole reason they formed the team in the first place was so they could rely on each other for help, but Lloyd had literally never even considered the idea of relying on others, so it is a massive revelation to him. Dagus wonders what kind of torture Lloyd must have been put through to end up like this, but for now he says they should just get some sleep. The two head back to the camp, and Cross stands guard while Lloyd and Dagus get some shut-eye in the tent. Lloyd isn't used to the idea, but having true companions sounds nice, so he wants to give it a try. The next morning, Lloyd finds Yui and asks her if she can help fetch some water, but Yui just stands there frozen in disbelief for a moment because this is the first time Lloyd has ever asked her to help him with anything. But she is glad that Lloyd is finally relying on her, so she happily agrees to help him. Meanwhile, in a nearby castle, an evil count receives a report saying all the magic stones have been placed just like he requested. Michaels is pleased to hear this since everything is going according to plan, and thanks to the monster attacks he set up, almost all the adventurers in the capital have been dispatched on missions. Now, the only ones left there are the low-ranking adventurers and the hero party, and honestly, Michaels would have preferred it if the hero party was gone as well, but he's confident he can overwhelm them with his forces easily enough, so it won't be a problem. Back in the forest, Lloyd and the others keep moving forward, but Yui is starting to get a bad feeling about this place. It's unnaturally quiet here, and the others think it's strange that they haven't encountered a single monster since they entered this part of the forest. Yui asks Lloyd if he had anything to do with the strange absence of monsters, but Lloyd tells her the only spell he has been doing is casting detection magic, and it doesn't repel monsters at all. That means something else must be scaring the monsters away, so Lloyd increases the range of his detection magic to see if he can figure out what it is. After scanning for a few seconds, he finally spots something, so he tells everyone that there's a horde of monsters around 2.5 kilometers ahead. According to the map, that's the direction of the farm they were heading to, but before they talk about that, Yui asks Lloyd if seriously just scan everything in a 2-kilometer radius. Lloyd confirms it, and he still doesn't think it's anything special, but the others tell him that's over 10 times the distance that even the most talented mages are able to use. Lloyd had no idea 2 kilometers was so impressive, but he instinctively feels the need to downplay his accomplishment, so he tells everyone that 2 kilometers is pretty much his max, and it consumes a lot of mana, so he can't do it often, but that doesn't make it any less impressive. Yui is getting really frustrated by how dense Lloyd is when it comes to recognizing his own power, but they've got a mission to deal with right now, so they will have to knock some sense into him later. They eventually arrive at the farm, but even though they were warned about the quantity of monsters ahead of time, actually seeing it in person is terrifying. The large number of high wolves aside, Lloyd remembers the report saying that there were many different types of monsters in the horde, so he is wondering where the rest of them went. The others agree with him since they know for a fact that there should be monsters in the forest that are stronger than the wolves here, so there's no way the wolves would have come out on top if the fight broke out. Lloyd asks if Yui knows where the owner of the farm is, but she says she isn't sure. The request said something about the owner getting injured and staying with his son in the city. Just then, Cross notices something strange down in the farm, so he tells the others to take a look, but they can't see anything because their vision isn't as good as Cross's. Lloyd can't see what's down there either, so he casts enhancement magic on his eyes, and now he is able to spot the ominous stone sitting in the middle of the farm. He casts the vision buff on the others as well, and they all agree that the stone looks like bad news, but from what Lloyd can tell, he believes it might be orc magic. Merlin once told him that orc magic is capable of controlling monsters, so someone must be using that magic stone to lure them all here. To be sure, Lloyd casts his detection magic again, and just as he had expected, he discovers another massive horde of monsters heading straight for them. He wonders why someone would go to so much trouble to attract monsters, since if they were trying to eliminate the party, there would have been several easier ways to do it. Lloyd is still deep in thought over this, but Cross reminds him that they still have the second horde of monsters heading towards them, so they should probably retreat as soon as possible. Yui tells him they can't retreat because if they do, the farm will be destroyed, but Cross points out that there's no way they can handle a horde of over 1,000 monsters on their own. However, Daggers doesn't think retreating is even possible at this point, since even if they manage to escape, they might end up leading the monsters straight into the village. None of them are sure what they should do, but Lloyd says he thinks they should stay and fight because he has a plan. First, he says he's going to need to get rid of that magic stone, so he asks Cross if he thinks he can hit it from here. Cross is an amazing marksman, so he is confident that he can aim well enough to hit the stone, but it's pretty far away, so he's not sure if he will have enough power to destroy it in one shot. Lloyd says that's fine, since if power is the only issue, he can compensate for it with his enhancement magic. Cross takes aim, and just before he shoots, Lloyd casts 3 layers of enhancement magic on him at the same time, allowing the arrow to fly all the way over to the magic stone and shatter it in one go. Cross is amazed that he actually made the shot, so he asks Lloyd what he did, and Lloyd explains that he just cast enhancement magic on Cross, his bow, and his arrow at the same time to pack as much force into the shot as possible. If it wasn't already clear, that's not something people are normally able to do, but Lloyd is as oblivious as ever, so doesn't think it's something worth praising him for. Anyway, now that the magic crystal has been destroyed, all the monsters start attacking one another because they are no longer being mind-controlled, and even if they don't completely wipe each other out, Lloyd thinks this should reduce their numbers by a lot. As for the other horde, Lloyd was kind of hoping they'd stop charging once the crystal was destroyed, but he had no such luck. Everyone gets into position as they wait for the monsters to arrive, and they start losing their nerve when they see the sheer number of monsters heading their way, but Lloyd tells them they need to wait for the monsters to get closer before they attack. Just as the monsters are about to get to Silica, Lloyd gives the signal, so she immediately casts her Firestorm spell, and it's a lot more effective than she thought it would because it's literally vaporizing the monsters right before her eyes. The others know there's no way Silica's spell could do this normally, so they ask Lloyd what he did, and he tells them he just cast mana enhancement and reduced mana consumption on Silica to make her spells more efficiently. Now that the first step is complete, Lloyd runs over to Cross to prepare for the next part. He establishes a mental link with him, which is something Lloyd can apparently do by the way, and using spatial magic, he relays the locations of all the flying monsters to Cross so he can shoot them through the thick smoke. Soon enough, all the flying monsters have been dealt with, so it's time for the final phase of Lloyd's plan. He runs over to Silica and asks if she's done dealing with all the land monsters yet. She says she has killed them all, but she's almost out of mana, so there's not much she can do at this point. Lloyd tells her there's no need to worry about that and asks her to hold his hand. Silica has no idea what Lloyd is thinking, but she does as he says, and as soon as their hands are touching, Lloyd begins transferring mana into her. Silica then uses that mana to cast a spell to create storm clouds over the forest in order to put out the fires, but once that's done, she collapses because she has officially used up all of her magic. Lloyd is exhausted as well, but even though Yui and the others are praising him for basically carrying the team on his back throughout the operation, the only going through his mind is how inadequate he is for getting tired after the subjugation of 1,000 monsters. This was the end of episode 4. Subscribe to not miss the next part.